so many people that make the Bluff Church work. And there's so many people I could brag on, the media, the worship team, and those people that we see, in their congregation. But, I'm up here and I'm listening to my buddy Steve pray, and I'm like, you know what? He's part of the elders group, and every one of those guys are committed to seeing the furtherance of the kingdom and the growth of this body and what we can do to make that happen in God's plan. But Steve, man, he is such a great addition to that. Engineering background, he's a critical thinker. He's about getting that building done so we can get in there and keep moving, right? So, hands off. See, thank you. I know he's probably like, Brent, later we're going to talk. But, I think honor is due there. So thank you for that. So, go ahead. Roll it. I don't know. Go ahead. Oh, we're going to do it? So here it is. Yeah, all right. So that was it. So we're going to... I was going on the next one. Mason pulled one on me. No. If you guys know me, I'm a little unorthodox, and I'm kind of a nut. And I got a water bottle, so I didn't have one last time. But what this is kind of a delay, so I can think about the next thing to say. But I do have notes up here, and I'm going to stay on those because last time it went 54 minutes, and I was like, oh, my goodness. So anyway, 30 minutes. Okay. That's my mom saying that. You're supposed to be like on my side. So I grew up in Patterson, Missouri. If you guys know, that's about 40 miles north of here. If you ever have been to Sam A. Baker State Park, then we're like a suburb of that. A small suburb. And it was a great place to grow up. It was a rather wholesome place there. There's a lot of churches and a lot of good ethical, thinking there. But as a teenager, it was a little bit boring. But I had this cousin, and he lived up in St. Charles, Missouri. And he had everything, and he was everything that I thought I wanted to be. And Tommy, he was good looking, okay? He had lots of muscles because he worked out. He had the most gorgeous girlfriends. And for a 14-year-old kid, that's like big, right? Can I get an amen from any of those? Yeah, if your wife's sitting next to you, you probably don't want to do that. See, I got a little distance here before she could get to me. But I wanted to be like him because he had this great house, and he had this pool, this in-ground pool. It was beautiful. And I was like, so whatever Tommy did, I would do because I wanted to be like Tommy. And so if you ever drive up to Sam A. Baker, you'll cross on 34 Highway before you get to 142 that crosses. You'll cross a bridge, okay? And that bridge is about 80 foot, I would say. I'm trying not to exaggerate. Maybe it's 100. It seemed like 1,000 one time. And guess what Tommy wanted to do? Jump off the bridge. Well, guess who didn't want to? I didn't. But I did. Because I wanted to be like Tommy. And you know that whole saying where your mom says, if Billy jumps off the bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge too? Now, that's not how my mom talks, so, But yeah, if Billy jumped, no, I wouldn't jump off for Billy, but I'd jump off for Tommy because I want to be like Tommy. And, that led to a lot of things that I did to be like Tommy that went against what I knew was wrong as a Christian. I compromised that. And I got into a lot of trouble with him. So, have you ever, felt that peer pressure to compromise your faith? To do something stupid like jump off a bridge? I mean, we didn't get hurt, thank the Lord, but it was just stupid. And I think that maybe we could all say that. I mean, if you've not done something stupid, please come see me because I want to know what the secret was. It seems like it takes me a couple of good hard knocks in the head before it knocks some sense into me. But even like this week, right? School started up, and teachers and students, you guys are back at school. Do you feel peer pressure at school? Like when you try to stand up for your faith, do you feel that? Well, it's there, right? Because our whole system, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is kind of geared to shut that down. They don't want to know about what Jesus has to say. They don't want to know about your faith. They don't want you living a life of holiness that would convict them from what they're doing. They just want what they want. And they're human, because we want that too. Or maybe it's at your job. Maybe you're put in a situation where you have to make decisions or that are not, they're maybe in a gray area where the Bible is like, that's not right, but our society's like, well, everybody else is doing it. That's the world we live in. And, do we make the right choice to go with what's the nature of God is telling us to do, or do we compromise? What about in our relationships, in our dating relationships or marriage relationships? When our partner feels like they want to go this way, but that that's not God's plan, that's not His direction. That's hard, right? Especially in a marriage. Because you can't, it's like you can tell your girlfriend or boyfriend goodbye, but that's tough. To remain faithful in that, even when the other part of you, in a sense, wants to go an opposite direction. Or what about just the world we live in? Think about it. If you turn on the TV, do you feel just how much of an attack there is against Christianity? People don't want to know what God has to say. They want Him to stay here on Sunday morning. He's not effective in they don't want Him in the real world. He has no business being out there. He has no business in our society, in our politics, in our decisions with our children, and how we run this nation. That's what our society, that's what our worldview pushes at us every day. And it's all a big lie. And we know that as Christians, but do we stand up for that? And what's an effective way to stand up to that? Do we storm the gates of the White House? Is that the way to do it? Do we buckle up and just suck it up and kind of conform and compromise? Well, that's not a good option either, is it? Well, I've done all those things. In my life, we look at these things and, in all those things, I have compromised. I'm ashamed to say it, but I have. And even sometimes when I had a really strong relationship with God, I kind of just, I know He's going to forgive me, and so I need, this person, we can come up with so many different excuses to justify our actions that we can justify about anything. And I have before in my life. And I'm betting I'm not the only one in the boat, because we're all human here. And if you haven't, please come see me. I want to know your secret. It's so easy to say, love God and love people, right? How much simpler can our statement be of who we are as a church? But when we take it out to the streets, it's not as easy as what we say. It's not as easy to love people when they're messy, when they're unlovable, right? I mean, it's easy to love people that love us, but Christ talked about loving people who don't love you. That's really where the blessing's at. That's really where we see things change. So, but how do we live this life of faithfulness when the whole world is saying we really don't want God's input? I don't really want to know what he has to say, because there's many ways to heaven, right? But the book of Daniel can give us some helpful, I don't know what all this stuff is, I'm going on here, but it can give us some very helpful answers in this question that we ask. How can we live faithfully? What does that look like? Last week we looked at how the Israelites were put into captivity with Babylon. I mean, it was their own fault. I mean, God had told them and nurtured them and said, hey, if you'll just follow these commandments, it's going to go. It was for their own benefit. And yet they turned away. They were supposed to be the nation that went out there and was the example, just like the church here should be the example to the world. But they failed. They failed in a terrible way. It got to the point where they were even more evil than the nations around them, sacrificing their children and doing all these things that was just completely against God. It was like they almost intentionally went against God and said, okay, I'm going to do this. What are you going to do about it? Well, God in his patience had enough. And now they're in Babylon. They're in captivity. They're slaves. They're exiled. They're hopeless. And you think, you know what? This would be a great time for God just to shut the book. I mean, sometimes if I was God, most of us wouldn't be around. I probably even wouldn't be around, because in my humanity, I want to just give up. That person has hurt me. That's like the 5th time they've hurt me. I just want to close the book on them. But that's not the God we serve. Thank goodness that's not the kind of God we serve. Because you know what? Even when we're not faithful, he's still faithful. And when we don't keep our promises, God still keeps his promises. He's not like us. That's why we need to be like him, right? That's the kind of God we serve. And if we can get that message as a church out to the world to say, God's not out there. God's not wanting to send you to a fiery place eternally. He is wanting you to live in relationship with him in paradise eternally, and right now too. And that's what's so amazing about the book of Daniel, is because when we see that, the book really should be closed here, it's like in Daniel, it shows that God's story still goes on. It's not a bump in the road for him. It didn't take him by surprise. And God's not finished with them, even in their well-deserved place, right? They got what they deserved, right? I mean, they're in exile. But then he shows up in a big way. The book of Daniel, just on a side note, I would encourage you guys to read that. There's some prophecy stuff in there, and it's a little bit hard to understand, but that's okay. There's some really good things about Daniel, the book of Daniel. It's really an epic book, in my opinion. So the Israelites, so they're in bondage. So if we can step into the sandals, I don't know. I was going to say shoes, but I'm pretty sure I don't know what they wore on for their feet. Maybe they went barefooted. So maybe if we could step into the skin of the Israelites, they had one of two choices, it would seem. One would be to rebel a bit against the system, to crash the gates, and kind of like what I said before. We could act that way and march against the White House gates and whatever. I'm not advocating that for anyone who's watching, because that's not what I'm about to say here. But and that would have been futile. Resistance is futile if you ever watch Star Trek. Or they could just surrender their identity, right? And just give in and go with the flow, right? So how do we live in a place like that and remain faithful. Is there another option? Right? So do we give up or do we like go all rebel? Okay? That's where I'm at. Are you guys with me out there? Amen. It's really hard to see with these glasses. You guys are just like little blobs. But I can't see the screen without these, so it's one of the great things about, getting older and wiser, right? Well, he does. Daniel shows us in his book, he shows us a way that we can do this. There is another option. And by the way, just to let you know, so at the time of the exile, Daniel and his friends were just teenagers. They probably weren't even old enough to drive a chariot at that time. No, Mason, that was yours. So you need to talk to him about that. I couldn't take that out of his notes, so because I thought that's like a dad joke. You already got a dad joke, Mason. Come on. Join the club, right? So anyway, so Daniel and his friends, they're taken to Babylon, and they're put into this program that they're basically they're taught the language, how to talk, how to dress. They're servants at the king's court, right? They get new names. If you kids don't like your name, or if there's any kids out there, you don't like it. I mean, would you rather have a name like Shadrach? I prefer Brent. So they got new names and they were made servants. So it kind of looks like they were in that they gave up, right? Their identity, because they're just going along with the flow, right? But that's not the case. Because in just a short period of time, they are actually singled out because they're not eating the food that the king is saying that they need to eat, because it goes against the dietary laws that were given to them by God. So right there we see, hey, there's a line that they drew there. And this is it. Daniel and his friends show, and I have to read this because I didn't want to mess this up, show that they will serve the best interests of Babylon because they're in captivity until those interests go against their obedience to God. So do you see that balance there where, okay, this is a little bit off my notes, so we might go 31 minutes. But is there times when you look and you see things going on that are supposedly Christian activities, and you look and you think, man, I really think that's given Christians a black eye of how they're doing that. If somebody's yelling on the side of the road, you're going to burn in hell and all these things, and they're only given that side of it, it makes God seem like he's just a tyrant, just looking to send you to hell. Or there's other things, billboards that say things that I'm thinking, that does not help our cause. Preachers on TV that, it's about money, money, money. And I'm thinking, that's not helping the cause of Christ. That's not who Christ is. That was just... So there is a middle ground. And it doesn't mean we have to compromise. They didn't. But did it work? Did it work for Daniel and his friends? Yeah, it did this time. Because if God's got your back, your success in the future is guaranteed. So let's go to Daniel 1:20. I'm not going to look behind it like I did the first time. I'm going to trust that it's up there. And it said, in every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king required of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters who were in all his kingdom. So we see just by that statement of faith that promise that God made way back to Abraham, that his children would be a blessing to the nations. We'll look at it. It's being fulfilled right now. It says, so God is still fulfilling his promises. And this is it right here. Sometimes God puts people in places of suffering to put them in a position to bring blessing upon someone else's life. So, I have a tendency sometimes to gripe about where I'm at and not look at the day and be thankful for I have another breath to breathe. I think maybe we all get into that sometimes. And but if we look at it in that context, then what we're going through and how we go through it could definitely, and I think it is, because God doesn't waste those opportunities. He doesn't put us through things just to teach us a lesson. He does that. But then if we can do that in the proper way, he's teaching someone else a lesson through that too. So just remember that. No matter if you're on the mountain or in the valley, there's people watching how we as Christians react in those. And that could change their experience the next time they're faced to it. So remember, you're being watched whether you know it or not. So even though Daniel and his friends are in this high position, it really is because they're kind of like advisors and to the king, and they're in his presence a lot, that they wouldn't have too many issues, that they wouldn't be removed from those pressures to compromise their faith, but they are continually. Take, for instance, Nebuchadnezzar, right? He builds this statue of himself, and he says, hey, every time that the trumpets blow, I want everyone to bow down and worship this statue, which would basically, a statue of him. So I think this guy, I don't know, it might be a stretch here, but I think he might have an ego problem. And but there's three guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Hey, if you guys ever get a chance, watch the VeggieTales version of this. It's really cool because it's a golden bunny, and they have to sing the bunny song, but it really ties in good. In fact, any of those stories with the VeggieTales, on my level, because there's entertainment, there's a lot of stuff for us as grown-ups in those too that really, like, when I think of Daniel, and I'm getting off, but yeah, the one with Daniel, or not, David and Goliath. Oh, you got to watch that one. It definitely, when I hear any message, I always think about Junior Asparagus. I come at you in the name of the Lord, and he's got that voice. Yeah, I do voice characterizations too, on the side. I just love to laugh. God gives us that ability to do that. And he gives us crazy people like me. But this is what they say, because the king's threat, you either do it or you die. And they're like, okay, well, this is what they say. Daniel 3:17. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. So he's able, yeah, from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O God, O king. So they're respectful, king, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They didn't. I really think that was done in a respectful way. They're like, we understand you're a little king with the little k, but the king we serve, we're not going to compromise that. Wow, what a stand. Hey, we're going to do this, whether he can do it, and we believe he will, but if he doesn't, doesn't matter. He's still the God we serve, and he's still God. I mean, wouldn't you think that these folks that had been around the king, and they're the ones who give him advice to things that actually would shape the Babylonian Empire, they're giving him advice on that, right? Because they're 10 times more wise than the other guys that he's got around there. So I think he'd be listening to those guys. You would think that they would be the ones to bow down, but no. They refused, again, and this is a point, refuse to let their dedication and their helpfulness, I missed that word, I didn't get that quite right, but their dealings with the Babylonian Empire, their loyalty to it, let's say, with their loyalty to God. There was no competition there. God was first. And that brings up the point where our identity in God comes before our identity in anything else. So our identity in God comes before our identity in anything else. That's why I had such a problem on that bridge with Tommy. It's because I really didn't have an identity with Christ. I didn't really know what it meant to be a person of value. I just looked at other people and I thought, I want what they want. I don't want what God wants because I really don't have a really good relationship with him. I didn't identify with Christ. But Nebuchadnezzar, Nebi, if you watch that detail, Nebi, I mean, he's furious. And so, you know, he orders these teenagers to be thrown into the fire. If you've been in church at any time, you've probably heard this story. So he throws them in there, and this fire's so hot, he heats it up like 7 times hotter than it's ever been. So I mean, it's like, you could probably see through it. It's so hot. And the guys who are throwing them in, they die. Right, they can't even take the heat. So these big muscled up guys who are tossing them in there, they die. They fall into the fire, and guess what? They don't burn up. Their clothes don't even burn up. They don't even smell like they've been in a fire. And then they look down, and there's someone else in the fire with them. Isn't that neat? I love that story. And he's real shiny. So it's like the Son of Man. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But there was another one that represented God in that fire with them. So they were not alone. And believe it or not, this actually brought worship from King Nebuchadnezzar. Amazing, right? How he could switch so easily. Daniel 3:28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Wow. What a change of heart. Well, I think if, you see a miracle like that, but he could have reacted differently, but he didn't. What a great thing. So, that's a point. It's taking a stand for our faith can create worship in others. Sure can. Again, people are watching you, how you live. There's a promise in that wherever you're at, whatever your situation turns out to be, you may not feel that way, but God is there with you in the fire, in the test, on that bridge. He's there. We should be encouraged by that because sometimes we feel alone. And then we see Daniel. He faces a similar situation. Years go by, and now the Babylonian Empire is conquered by the Persians, and there's a new king, new emperor, King Darius. Not a bad guy, really. But he gets a little bit full of himself because he's got some leaders that are really trying to stir some stuff up because Daniel's got a really good name. He's got a great reputation. He's trustworthy, all that. So they want to change they want that spot. So they're going to do whatever they can to get Daniel out of them. And this is what they say in Daniel 6, 4 through 5. Then the high officials and satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of God." The only thing they could get on Daniel was he thought God was that important. He loved God that much. Wow, if that could, I want to be like that. I want to be like Daniel. I want people to say, "Well, I can't really say anything bad about him. I think he's a little bit too radical as a Christian. He thinks, God's got to be in everything, Wow. I mean, I want to be known like a Daniel who stands up and nobody can have anything bad to say about me, but he loves God too much. So let that be a challenge to us, okay? But living a life that Daniel lived doesn't necessarily come easy. I mean, after all, these guys wanted to destroy him, right? And so that's what happens. They set up this trap. They sweet talk the king. They say, hey, you need to set up for the next month or so that no one is allowed to pray to anything but you. Wow. He's probably thinking, yeah. That's the problem with power that's not godly power, is that it becomes ego. And so, hey, he feels like he's a god. He's not. He's going to learn. So what's a follower of Christ supposed to do in this? What's a follower of God supposed to do in this situation? Well, do we again storm the gates of the kingdom, or do we just bow down and take it? Well, let's see what Daniel did. Daniel 6:10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, right, that he had to bow down and pray to the king, little K, he went to his house where he had windows in the upper chambers toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. You know what that says? He didn't change a thing about what he was doing. He didn't do anything different. He just went about his faithfulness to God as he had done previously. Well, Daniel, you would think he would be one that would probably be like, oh, okay. I mean, I've been serving King Darius and being his advisor for this line. But he chooses to disobey his king. And I think there may have been some friendship there, if I go by Veggie Tales. But he's locked up with a bunch of hungry lions. Now, I've talked about, how I would like to die someday. And some people say, oh, I'd like to die in my sleep, or, I would like to die scuba diving. But to die being eaten by lions, I'm pretty sure that's not on my top 100. But the next morning, 24 hours later, then he's thrown in there, and they find him cuddled up with the kittens. I'm not really a cat person, but, I could become one real quick in that situation. Oh, yeah, come here, puppy. Or no, come here, puppy. Well, yeah, I just think they were puppies, and I could be nice to them. I'm sorry if you guys are a cat person. But God shuts the mouth of the cats, right? And nothing happens to Daniel. And again, this inspires worship in King Darius, which wasn't a bad guy. He just has his priorities a little jacked up. Been there. So Daniel 6, 26 through 27. I make this decree, and this really sounds very emperorish. I make a decree that in all my royal domain people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall never end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in the heavens, and he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So that's great. That's awesome. But how did Daniel and his friends find the courage and boldness to serve their oppressors, right? But then also have the boldness to stand up for what they believe in God. I mean, nobody else seemed to be doing that in that age, but they were. Well, we don't have stories. I'm sure there were some. So how are these guys different? And what is the source of their faith? So we're going to look at Daniel. And there's two things in his life that I would submit had a prominent impact on his life. The first one is when he interprets can you put that statue up there, that picture of that statue? Daniel interprets a very strange dream that King Nebuchadnezzar has. It involves a statue made of different metals, and it serves to represent all of the empires that would come after Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, it's tall and it's impressive. And then what's really cool is that God throws a rock at this in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, and it just crumbles to dust. It's like, kind of like when you're at the fairgrounds, and you've got this ball, and there's a clown there, and he's all happy, and then when you actually hit him and knock him over, but God just takes a rock and it crumbles, and it reforms into a mountain that's an everlasting mountain. So it's just really interesting. What it shows is that God's all powerful. I mean, even over all the kingdoms that could come up and rise up against him, it's nothing to God. It's like, I'm just going to throw a rock at it. It's amazing. And so for Daniel, that's an encouragement, because he's in exile right now, right? With Nebuchadnezzar. Say that 3 times real fast. But so that's an encouragement for him, and I think that was a pivotal point in his life too. The other one is a moment when Daniel is actually having a vision of himself, and it's about these 4 strange beasts. And they represent these separate empires that are to come. And the fourth beast is massive. It's the worst one of them all. Evil, horns, it rampages through the land. It's destroying everything that God has built. It crushes humanity. And Daniel mentions that this 4th beast, this evil empire to come, will crush this Son of Man who will represent the true being made in God's image. But it will be how God will set up and change everything. Let's look at that verse real quick. Believe it or not, I'm getting close to closing up here, guys. Daniel 7:13. I saw in the night vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And he was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. And all peoples, nations, and languages would serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So basically what it's saying is there's a true king with a big K that will come, called the Son of Man, and he will defeat the beast. And his kingdom shall have no end. Does that sound familiar? The Son of Man? It should. So if we boil it down right here for us in Daniel, it's basically this. God's in control. He's got it under control. He's in charge. Really is. So rulers and kingdoms, they can come and go. But God's plan, his plan to save his people, which was an encouragement to Daniel, and us, which is encouragement to us even today, it's the same plan. It cannot be stopped. This will happen. And if we're one of him, in him, then we have only hope. It's only up from here, guys. Really. It's only up. And that was a strength, I think, for Daniel. So let's fast forward just a little bit into the Gospels and address this Son of Man. We find Jesus, he calls himself the Son of Man multiple times in the New Testament. And when he does that, he's referring back to this dream that Daniel had of the Son of Man. So we can surmise from this that when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, is this on the screen? Is this mono? Okay. Thank you. I really do need to get a drink. I'm not stalling. When Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, he's claiming that the world's evil will crush him. Okay? But by doing so, it will make him king over the universe once God has raised him to life again. So, this is the story that we will get to further down the road here. But it's all about redemption for us. And what an encouragement to Daniel and to us today. I'm not going to stay too long on that, but Jesus carries this message of Daniel forward. So, we've been talking about the balance. So, you've got extremists in every religion, okay? But I really, I don't like really calling Christianity a religion. I think it's a relationship. And, but there is a balance, because, here's an example. Remember when Jesus was asked, it was really the religious leaders at the time, they're trying to put him on the spot. They did this a lot. And what's really cool is that Jesus always asks them a question back, and they're like, and then they'd give him an answer, and he'd ask him another one. And finally, they just ended up trapping themselves in their own questions. But in this one, they come to him and they give him a coin. They say, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Because these are Jewish folks, and they're like, And what Jesus says is, well, give Caesar what is Caesar's and give God what is God. And what he was saying is that, I don't like paying taxes. Do you? If you like paying taxes, can you raise your hand? All? Really? Okay. Well, we can all agree on that, probably as a nation. But I do see that, the need for it in certain instances, but I also see the abuse. But Jesus said, pay Uncle Sam what is Uncle Sam's, and give me what is mine, which is your loyalty, your life, your love. So he's not advocating us to go overthrow the White House it doesn't mean we don't stand up and say this is wrong, but it means that there's other options here too. One more thing about that. Jesus, his message was about us loving our enemies and seeking to serve them and their best interests while maintaining absolute loyalty and faithfulness to him. Even in the Roman occupation. We can be, and sometimes maybe we feel that way in the United States, where we're kind of oppressed as Christians. That doesn't mean we don't speak out, but it means we just keep doing the right things, because how we win the world is one person at a time. How we win the world is how we live every day. That's how we win the world. It's not how loud that we can yell or what big events that we can put together. It's that one-on-one every day. Hey, this is what God has done in my life. He's given me hope. And that's really what our world needs. All this craziness that's going on in the world, it's because they cannot find any satisfaction in what they're doing. And we have that answer. It's not about breaking down walls. It's about relationship with God and others. I might be getting ahead of myself, but you know what? If we hear it a couple times, it's okay. Repetition is a teacher. And this is really this is the prevailing hope in the book of Daniel. It's the big idea, cha-ching, God always keeps his promises. He's not going to leave the children of Israel where they're at in Babylon or now in Persia. He's going to complete the promise that he gave them. He's going to get them out of there. And So let's bring it back to the world we're in. It seems like it's getting harder to follow Christ. I think that sometimes, and then I read about these situations that, in the Bible where these folks were put in life and death situation, life and death. I mean, they lived this stuff. We're not there yet. And they did that. So I don't know if that's I don't know how accurate that is, my thinking of it's harder to serve God than it ever has. I don't know. Maybe it's more convenient not to serve him now than it ever was. But we may not get faced with the lion's den or the fiery furnace, but our faith is going to be tested. So what are we going to do? Are we going to give in? Because the struggle's real. All right, you've seen the coffee cup, right? The struggle's real, but so is God. But it is possible. It really is. It's possible to live a faithful life to God, even in our difficult times, okay? And I think there's some things we must do and some things we must remember. And this is for me as much as it is for you. The first thing, yes, be a true God follower. Well, what does that mean? A true God follower. What? Well, first of all, if you're not saved, here's the truth of it. You're not in the family of God. So that's the first thing that you got to get, let's say, under your belt. And it's not a hard thing. It really isn't. It comes with you realizing who you are. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit more. But first, and then we need to start doing something. Because as much as we want to lean back or could lean back on that, salvation, it should push us to move forward, right? Because Christ said that, faith without action, what does it produce? It's kind of dead, isn't it? It's not doing anything, right? It's not accomplishing anything. The next one is to put our identity in God before anything else. If we realize that we're Americans, right? But first, we're Christians. That our kingdom is not what we see here and what we touch. We're a part of an eternal kingdom. That's way beyond what we've got right here, okay? And we're all going to be hanging out together. It's going to be great, really. We'll probably have these glorified bodies where everybody's like, they look, If you're trying to lose a little weight, don't worry about it. In the kingdom, you can look whatever. Everybody can be a Brad Pitt and a, I was going to say Farrah Fawcett, but that really dates my how old I am. Oh, stop it, Heath. You're laughing at me. She was beautiful. All right, but we are citizens of a whole different kingdom. Please remember that. Keep that in mind. Things we must remember. And this is not all conclusive. These are just some things. And this is my addition, so sorry, Mason. I'm using my own stuff now. God keeps his promises. Wow, if we could just remind ourselves of that every morning when we make up, when we put on makeup, and guys, when you wake up, that he's faithful. He's always faithful, even when we're not. Isn't that encouraging? Because sometimes I'm not faithful to God, but he still is to me. I mean, the children of Israel, obviously in this point, had not been faithful to God, but he's still keeping his promise. The story still goes on. All right, moving on. God's track record is flawless. Okay? He doesn't say something and not do it. He doesn't make a mistake. All right? And so that should be an encouragement to us because we can remind ourselves, this is we looking to the past and say, I remember when God did that for me. I remember when I was lonely and God stepped in. I remember when my son was in that car accident and we didn't think he was going to make it, and he did. And I feel like that was God stepping in. And we could all put our own scenarios into that, where it's like, you know what? If it wasn't for God, I've heard this a lot of times. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't even be alive today. So remember the things of your past. And if you don't have anything really that anchors you to that, look in the Bible. Remember the things that these guys went through and what God did in the past. Because that is just a precursor to what he's going to do in the future. He doesn't change. Okay? Next one, God is in control. And this is about the future. So we're looking to the past, right? Now we look to the future and say, God is in control. He's in control. He's got this. And if we remind him, or remind ourselves of those promises that he has for us in the future, that this is not the end, that we're his forever, that's looking forward. So we look back, we look forward, and those things should encourage us to where we're at right now, what we're doing right now. Are we compromising? For what? For who? We're not even a part of this kingdom here on earth. We're not a part of this world system. We're in the world, but we're not of it. I'm not preaching I'm not teaching at you. This is me. This is me. I'm in the same boat. United States, we get so sedated with the day-to-day things of, it's so easy to go get a hamburger or do this and this and this, and we forget how blessed we are. Worship team, can you guys come back up? Thanks. So even in this crazy world, we're going to be tested. We're going to be asked to do things or pressured to do things that we know are not what God would have us do. That as members of a different kingdom, we're not governed by this kingdom on earth. We should not be rebellious in that. If it doesn't go against God's teaching, right, then we shouldn't be fighting it in that. We should be fighting the good fight. More of the one-on-one, I think, is what is effective. So, so the next time you're standing on that proverbial bridge, and on your left side, you got Tommy, you got the world, and Tommy, I love you if you ever see this. And they're saying, hey, just jump. Everybody's doing it. I would encourage you to take just a moment as a child of God to look to this side and see that God is right there. And he's saying, hey, just be like me. While they're saying, hey, jump, be like us. God's just saying, hey, be like me. I got you. Because you know what? That's when we're going to see real change outside those doors. Is when we realize that we're not enslaved to what the world thinks about us and what we have to do to be considered a success. It's all jacked up. It's what God says about us in his kingdom that defines who we are. And we should want to be like him, because that's what changes us, and that's what gives us the power to go out there and do what our mission statement is. And what is that? Love God and love people. Well, how can we love God and love people if we don't have the right mind of God in us when we go out there? We can't do it. We can't do it the proper way. That's really what I got to say this morning. But if there's anyone in here that you've not made that decision, you're not even a Christian at this point, you're not even in the kingdom, then I would encourage you. The elders and I are going to be in the back here in just a few minutes. If you want to come back and talk about that, it's not hard. It really isn't. But it's a complete change from death to life by just a few moments and a realization of where you are and where you want to go. And God will take care of the rest. Because you know what? You're going to have baggage. You're going to have junk on you. You know, Christians still have that stuff on them. Sometimes it takes years for us to get out of some things. But God's still working on us. And if it's not salvation, if you just need to pray somebody, man, I've had a hard week. I got some relationship problems. We're not back there. We're not going to be spreading anything around. I've said that before. We're family, and family don't do that. I mean, family that love each other don't spread rumors around about each other. We're on your side. So I appreciate you listening this morning, and hopefully we can remember these things. When the hard times come, remember what happened in the past, what God did in the past, what He's doing in the future. And you know what? We're in a whole different kingdom, so who we're trying to please is the King of the universe, not the king of this world. I love you guys. I'm going to be in the back if you want to pray. Elders in the back, and Steph, go ahead. Thanks.